It begins as a quiet drive through the Colorado mountains, or maybe it's the trap he planned all along. A pregnant woman is locked inside an SUV by her own husband as he pours gasoline around the car before setting it ablaze in the freezing night. You'd think her story ends there, but instead of saving her, he jumps into his mistress's car and speeds away as if nothing ever happened. What he doesn't know is that fate has other plans, because at that precise moment of life or death, a single father appears and pulls her from the brink. What follows is a battle for survival, hidden truths, and a level of justice no one sees coming. The late afternoon light was fading over the Colorado mountains, and the wind carried a sharp chill that made the tall pines tremble. Emily Whitman sat quietly in the passenger seat of her husband's dark SUV, one hand resting on her stomach, where the tiny flutter of her 14-week pregnancy made her feel both fragile and hopeful. A dull headache throbbed behind her eyes, but she tried to hide it. Michael had insisted this drive would help her relax. He said the mountain air would be good for her. She wanted to believe him. She always wanted to believe him. Michael kept one hand on the steering wheel while the other hovered constantly near his phone. Every time it buzzed, he'd glance down with a tension around his mouth that Emily had never seen before. She tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the landscape outside. The sky was shifting from gold to gray. The temperature had dropped to 45 degrees, chilling the windows. Another buzz lit up the screen. As Michael loosened his grip to adjust the heat controls, Emily saw the message clearly. "Sweetheart, when are you coming to me?" The name above it, Jessica, stabbed her in the chest. Her breath hitched. She recognized the betrayal as it unfolded in front of her. Michael had someone else, someone impatient, someone waiting. She swallowed hard. The tiny pulse of life in her belly fluttered again, this time with unease. Michael must have sensed the shift in her breathing because he stiffened. Then he abruptly took a turnoff he hadn't mentioned before. The road narrowed, climbing higher into the mountains. It was quieter here, more isolated. The trees pressed in closer, and there were no houses in sight. The sky darkened quickly. Emily watched the temperature drop on the dashboard. 44, 43. She rubbed her arms and tried to calm her breathing. "Michael, where are we going?" she asked softly. "Just clearing my head," he muttered, his eyes fixed ahead. He wouldn't look at her. Minutes later, he pulled the SUV to a stop on a lonely stretch of road. No cars passed, no lights shone, just the wind whispering through the pines. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. Before she could speak, Michael got out and slammed his door. She reached for her phone out of instinct, but it wasn't on her lap. She looked up just in time to see Michael walk to the edge of the embankment and hurl something down. Her phone, she heard it clatter against the rocks far below. "Michael, what are you doing?" she cried out. He came back to her door, yanked it open, and shoved her back against the seat. His face was twisted with a rage she had never seen. "That baby might not even be mine," he spat. "You think I don't know what you're capable of?" His breath smelled of whiskey and resentment. Emily tried to shield her stomach. "Stop, please, I've never lied to you," Emily whispered, but her voice was shaking so badly the words faded. Michael stepped back and slammed the door. Emily heard the sound of the locks engaging from the outside. Panic seized her. She pulled at the handle. It wouldn't budge. Her heart hammered in her ears. Through the fogging window, she saw Michael walk to the back of the vehicle. He opened the trunk and dragged out a red gasoline can. Her lungs froze. She pounded on the window with the palm of her hand, screaming for him to stop. The cold glass numbed her skin. He ignored her completely. He poured a wide circle of fuel around the SUV. The fumes seeped through the door seals, sharp and nauseating. Emily gagged, pounding harder, desperate for him to look at her, to remember she was his wife, carrying his child. But he didn't turn. Michael flicked a lighter. The spark flared. Then flames rippled along the gasoline like hungry snakes rushing toward the vehicle. Emily screamed and fumbled with her seatbelt, but her hands were trembling uncontrollably. Smoke began to pour from under the hood as the heat pushed against the glass. Michael didn't give her a single glance. He walked away toward a second truck parked on the side of the road, one she hadn't seen before. A woman was sitting in the driver's seat. Even through the veil of smoke, Emily recognized Jessica's silhouette. Michael climbed in beside her. The truck pulled away and disappeared around the bend. The fire spread quickly up the outside of the SUV. The smell of burning rubber filled the cabin. Emily coughed violently, unable to get enough air. Her eyes watered, her throat burning. She pulled at the seatbelt until her arms ached, her vision blurred. The baby. The thought screamed inside her. She pressed a hand to her stomach. The tiny heartbeat she'd seen on the ultrasound, the life she'd whispered to every night, was now trapped with her in a steel coffin filling with smoke. She tried the other locked door. She tried kicking the window, but her legs were weak. The smoke thickened, swirling like a dark fog. Her chest tightened. Each breath felt heavier, harder. "Please, someone help me, please." The flames reached the sides of the SUV. The metal groaned. The air became unbearably hot. Emily's head spun. She pressed her face against the small gap between the seat and the door, searching for air, but there was nothing left to offer relief. Her heart beat erratically now, scared and fast. Sweat mixed with tears, her legs grew numb. She realized with terrifying clarity that she might never see her baby grow. She might never feel tiny hands wrap around her finger. She might never escape this fiery cage. Her vision darkened at the edges. She heard the roar of the flames, the groan of the metal, and the distant howl of the wind moving through the trees. Everything else faded away. And in that last flicker of consciousness, Emily understood the truth. Michael had left her here to die. No one knew she was here. No one would find her unless a miracle happened soon. Jacob Cole drove his old pickup truck down the winding Colorado road as the late afternoon sky faded toward gray. His daughter, Sarah, sat in the back seat with her violin case strapped in beside her, humming softly after her weekly music lesson. Jacob glanced at her in the mirror with quiet pride. Life as a single dad had never been easy, but he had built a steady rhythm that worked for them both. After years as a firefighter and then a sudden switch to a repair job that kept him closer to home, he'd learned the importance of being present. He never wasted moments with his daughter. He chose the mountain route because it was usually empty at this hour and because he liked the peaceful view. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine. Sarah continued humming until she suddenly stopped and pointed ahead. Jacob followed her hand and saw a thin plume of smoke rising into the sky. At first, he assumed it was from a campsite, but the smoke shifted dark and thick, with a rhythm he recognized from years on rescue crews. It was the kind of smoke that came from burning metal and rubber. His instincts reacted before his thoughts. Smoke like that meant danger. He felt a familiar surge of adrenaline rush through him, the same force that once shot through his limbs whenever an alarm rang at the station. He slowed the truck and pulled over to the side of the road. Sarah leaned forward between the seats, her eyes wide. "Dad, that looks like a car fire." Jacob nodded once, already calculating distance, wind direction, and heat. "Call 911, he said. He passed her his phone because hers had died earlier. She unlocked it with quick fingers and started talking to the operator while Jacob stepped out into the freezing air. The cold hit him immediately, but the heat from the distant flames pressed against his face a moment later. He estimated about 50 feet between his truck and the burning vehicle ahead. That distance was safer, but not enough. The fire could spread or cause the gas tank to explode without warning. He jogged forward carefully, pulling his jacket collar over his mouth. The smoke grew thicker the closer he got. Gusts of wind carried sparks across the asphalt. He saw the shape of a dark SUV with flames licking at its lower frame. The windows were hazed with smoke, and the engine compartment glowed with a dangerous orange pulse. As he approached from the side, he spotted a figure inside. Someone was moving. Someone was pounding on the passenger window with terrified force. A woman. He ran toward the door. The heat was ferocious, like standing too close to an open furnace. The metal was warping in places. Jacob saw her through the smoke-caked glass. Her face was smudged with soot, and she waved frantically at him, coughing violently, trying to pull away from the rapidly spreading fire near her feet. Her fear hit him in a way that felt almost physical. He quickly checked for a way to open the door, but the handle was locked and too hot to grab. He backed away and ran to his truck. Inside the emergency kit, he kept a short-handled shovel, originally meant for digging tires out of snow. He grabbed it and raced back. The first swing against the window did nothing. The sound rang out like hitting stone. He swung again, adjusting the angle. SUV windows were designed to withstand force. They were meant to protect passengers during crashes, but now that protection was trapping her inside. The smoke swirled thickly, and the woman pounded from within, her movements growing weaker. He looked at his hands. The skin on one already felt warm and tight from the heat. He roughly shrugged off his leather jacket and wrapped it around his forearm twice. The extra padding might help shield him for a few seconds. He pressed his protected arm against the top corner of the glass and used the shovel's blade to aim for the thin edge, where the structure was slightly weaker. "Dad, hurry!" Sarah cried from the road. He heard her voice tremble. He needed to finish this before the flames reached the cabin. He struck 3 times. On the 4th blow, the corner of the window cracked. The fracture spider-webbed out. He repositioned the shovel and hit it again. The center of the window bowed inward, and the entire panel shattered with a rush of hot air and smoke. The force nearly knocked him back. He leaned in immediately. The woman coughed as the fresh air hit her face. Jacob reached inside without hesitation. The heat seared through the leather jacket, but he ignored it. He grabbed her by the arms and pulled. She resisted at first, not out of fear, but because her seatbelt held her in place. He fumbled for the buckle with shaking fingers until it released. The moment she was free, he pulled her out with all his strength. Her clothes were stained with soot, her hair was singed at the tips, heat radiated from her back. He lifted her from the vehicle as quickly as he could, and half carrying, half supporting her, he moved her across the cracked pavement. When they were far enough away, he lowered them both to the ground. The cold earth helped cool her clothes, and he gently rolled her to put out any lingering sparks. A loud blast erupted behind them. The SUV's fuel line had ignited. The fiery explosion sent a wave of heat over their bodies. Jacob shielded her with his arms. She huddled against him, barely conscious. When the shock wave subsided, he checked her breathing. It was shallow but steady. She pried her eyes open. He saw fear in them, along with relief and exhaustion. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as a painful rasp. "You're safe now. I've got you," he said. He kept his voice low and steady so she could understand him despite the ringing in her ears. She blinked slowly and let her head rest on his chest. Her body trembled from smoke inhalation and shock. Jacob held her carefully, making sure her lungs were expanding evenly. He could feel a faint tremor along her abdomen, a protective instinct that made him tighten his grip just a little more. Behind them, the flames roared into the darkening sky. Jacob didn't look back. His focus remained on the woman who had nearly died in front of him, and who, for reasons he didn't yet understand, mattered more than he expected in that moment. Flashing red and blue lights arrived just 7 minutes after Sarah's frightened call. The sound of sirens echoed through the trees and bounced off the cold stone of the mountainside. Jacob moved back to give the firefighters room as they rushed toward the flaming wreckage. He kept a hand resting under Emily's shoulders. Her breathing was shallow, and her face was smudged with soot. A thin line of blood trickled from her left nostril. She shivered from shock, exhaustion, and the cold Colorado air pressing against her smoke-warmed skin. Paramedics hurried over with oxygen equipment, lifting her gently, but even that small movement made her flinch. They fitted a mask over her mouth. She took several shaky breaths as the cool oxygen helped clear the fog clouding her mind. The fire crew moved quickly to extinguish the remaining flames. Jacob watched them work, knowing exactly what they would find inside. By some miracle, she had escaped before the vehicle collapsed into a molten ruin. He looked up when he heard the sound of another engine. To his disbelief, a familiar truck rolled up to the scene. Michael got out before the vehicle came to a complete stop. Jessica followed, her hair perfectly styled. Despite the chaos around them, they seemed out of place among the smoke, fire debris, and frantic emergency workers. Jacob's stomach tightened. They shouldn't have been there. They had clearly returned once they saw the sirens. They needed to control the story. Michael rushed over with an exaggerated expression of shock. He put a hand to his forehead as if he were crushed with grief. "What happened here?" he shouted loudly. "My wife, she must have done something reckless. She hasn't been herself. I told her this road was dangerous." His voice broke in a way that almost sounded convincing, almost. Jessica pulled out her phone and started recording, with tears that seemed conveniently placed. "She threatened us," she told the nearest officer. "She said she would hurt herself and blame us. We didn't know how to help her. She drove off before we could calm her down." Her voice trembled. It might have fooled anyone who wasn't watching her eyes. They were too alert and calculating. A paramedic called for more oxygen as they prepared to move Emily toward the ambulance. A doctor who had arrived with the emergency response came over and examined the soot around her lips. "She inhaled a dangerous amount of smoke," he said. "This could affect the pregnancy. We need to get her to the hospital immediately." Emily's eyelids fluttered. She could hear the words, and each one wounded her more deeply than the last. Jacob stayed by her side until Michael stepped between them with forced authority. "Get away from my wife," he snapped. "You've done enough." His glare was sharp, familiar, spiteful. Jacob stood his ground but didn't speak. This wasn't the time to confront him. Emily opened her eyes for a moment and searched the crowd until she found Jacob's face. Fear and gratitude flashed there. She couldn't speak, but the message was clear. 2 officers pulled Michael aside for questioning. They also asked Jessica to wait nearby. Jacob gave the officers a brief account of what he witnessed, but Michael overheard and scoffed loudly. "He's pretending to be a hero," Michael said. "My wife must have panicked and crashed the car. Look at him. He just wants attention." The officers took notes but said nothing. Emily was lifted onto a gurney. She clutched the oxygen mask, trying to breathe against the rising panic. Michael ran after the paramedics. "I need to go with her," he insisted. "She's my wife. She needs me." He spoke with urgency, but there was something hollow beneath the performance. Still, the medical team allowed him to ride in the ambulance after confirming he wouldn't obstruct their work. Jacob tried to follow, but Michael turned his head sharply. "Stay away from my family," he hissed. A paramedic gently held Jacob back from getting closer. With no other choice, Jacob watched the ambulance doors close. The vehicle pulled away, its siren cutting through the mountain air. At the hospital, Emily was placed in a trauma room. Machines beeped around her as doctors attached monitors to her chest and stomach. A nurse adjusted the oxygen while another checked her vitals. Michael stood near the foot of the bed, pacing and checking his phone repeatedly. When a police officer came in to complete the incident report, Michael immediately positioned himself as the authority. "She was unstable," he said. "She was emotional. She said she didn't want to live. You have to understand the pressure she's under." The officer looked at Emily. She was conscious but could barely speak. Her throat burned with every attempt to form words. She tried to raise her hand to signal disagreement, but her strength was gone. Her heart rate monitor beeped faster. Outside the room, Jacob stood in the hallway with his hands clenched. He refused to leave until he knew she was safe. He saw Michael step out of the room to take a call. The moment the door closed behind him, Jacob slipped inside. Emily looked up at him. Her voice was faint and raspy. "He wants to kill me." The confession was almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of truth. Jacob stood motionless. For a moment, everything inside him went still. Then, a determination he hadn't felt in years settled firmly on his shoulders. He nodded once, the silent promise forming in his chest. He would not let Michael hurt her again. Behind him, the hallway lights flickered softly. The chaotic night was beginning to shift. Soon, the truth would start to break through the lies. The hospital lights glowed with a cold, white haze that made the long corridor feel colder than it was. Jacob stood by the window, looking out at the parking lot far below as he held his phone to his ear. His voice was low but steady. He had called an old friend from the fire department, someone who'd spent over a decade analyzing vehicle fires. As Jacob described the SUV's condition, his friend replied without hesitation. The vehicle couldn't have ignited on its own. The fire's behavior pointed to an accelerant. When Jacob heard the words, he felt the truth tighten like a knot in his chest. Someone had started that fire intentionally. He thanked his friend and put the phone back in his pocket. His pulse beat harder. The thought of Emily trapped inside that burning car replayed in his mind. He could still see her hand against the smoke-covered glass. He could still feel the weight of her trembling body as he pulled her away from the flames. The idea that someone had done this to her on purpose filled him with a steady, controlled anger. Inside the hospital room, Emily had been moved from the trauma unit to a regular patient room. The machines had been reduced to just a few monitors, but she still breathed with difficulty. Her voice remained weak, and every time she drew a breath, it seemed to take careful effort. She kept one hand gently on her stomach. The doctors had assured her the baby was stable for now, but she needed rest and oxygen. Michael had insisted the hospital restrict visitors, claiming it was for Emily's safety. In reality, he wanted to control who contacted her and what she might reveal. Jacob knew it. The nurses knew it too, though they couldn't say so openly. Michael had been pacing the hallway for nearly an hour, making calls and demanding updates on Emily's condition. His behavior was erratic, but just polished enough that someone less observant might believe his concern was genuine. When Michael finally stepped outside to take another phone call, Jacob seized the brief window of opportunity. He walked silently to Emily's door and slipped inside. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic. The only sounds were the soft hum of the air purifier and Emily's shallow breaths. She opened her eyes slowly as she sensed movement. Her face relaxed when she recognized him. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice thin, almost fragile. He moved closer to the bed. "I spoke with someone who knows about fires," he said softly. "The car didn't burn on its own. Someone said it." He waited to see if she would deny it or try to hide her fear. Instead, her hand trembled. "It was Michael," she said. The words came out slowly, shaped by exhaustion and dread. "He locked the doors. He poured gasoline. I tried to scream. He lit the fire and left." The memory strained her voice until she had to stop and catch her breath. Jacob felt a heaviness settle in his chest. Hearing her confirm it made the situation real in a way that even the fire hadn't. "Emily, you have to tell the police," he said. "You can't carry this alone. They need to know what he did." She shook her head weakly. "If I accuse him now, he'll hurt me, or he'll hurt the baby. He always finds ways to control everything." Her eyes glistened with fear. "I can't lose this baby." Before Jacob could respond, the door flew open. Michael stormed in with a flurry of loud, angry steps. His eyes locked on Jacob, and his face darkened. "What are you doing in here?" he barked. "I told the staff she needs rest. Get out." Emily flinched at the volume of Michael's voice. Jacob straightened, refusing to be intimidated. Michael strode over, grabbing Emily's arm in a way that made her wince in pain. Jacob reacted instantly. He raised his phone and hit record, holding it up just high enough to capture the image of Michael's hand tightening on her wrist. Michael realized too late what he'd done. He snatched his hand back sharply, but the damage was done. Jacob had the footage. Without a word, he walked past Michael and out of the room. Michael swore under his breath but didn't follow. He knew there was nothing he could do now without making it worse. Jacob walked directly to the small office near the nurses' station where the local police chief was waiting to gather additional statements. He showed the chief the video. The officer watched it twice, his expression tightening. He had already been skeptical of Michael's story, and the new evidence deepened his suspicion. The chief thanked Jacob and promised to proceed discreetly until they had enough to confront Michael directly. News began to spread through the hospital staff and eventually through the town. Photos of Jacob carrying Emily from the fire surfaced online. Articles began appearing, calling him the hero dad of the mountain. People praised his courage and the tenderness with which he shielded Emily in every picture. Jacob ignored the attention. He didn't save her to be admired. He saved her because she had needed someone when no one else had come. In Emily's room, the nurses adjusted her pillows and helped her sit up. She kept glancing at the door, afraid Michael would return with more anger. When Jacob stepped back in, her posture relaxed. He approached slowly so she wouldn't feel rushed. "Michael wants me to sign a report," she whispered. "He says it will help close the case. He wants me to say it was an accident." Jacob pulled a chair closer to her bed. "Don't sign anything," he said. His voice was quiet but strong. "He's trying to protect himself. You deserve to have the truth heard. You and your baby deserve safety." Her hands trembled slightly. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Every time I try to stand up to him, he finds a way to break me down." Jacob leaned forward, his tone firm. "You're not alone now. I won't let him hurt you again." For the first time since the fire, Emily let out a breath that didn't tremble. She believed him. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a tiny glimmer of safety growing inside her. The night settled heavily over the hospital, bringing a silence that felt unsettling rather than peaceful. The fluorescent lights in the hallway hummed softly as nurses moved in and out of rooms with slow, practiced steps. Emily slept in uneven breaths, aided by the oxygen tube resting gently inside her nose. Doctors had told her to rest, but even in sleep, her body remained tense with fear and exhaustion. Around 2 a.m., the halls were nearly empty. Michael returned to the hospital, a hood pulled over his head. He kept his gaze low, hoping not to draw attention. He had been questioned by police earlier that day and had been met with the suspicion building around him. Panic had begun to replace the confidence he once wore so easily. He needed to get control back, and he needed to do it before Emily told anyone else the truth. He slipped quietly into her room. The soft glow from the wall monitor cast a dim light on her resting figure. Her skin looked pale, and her breathing remained slow but steady. Michael closed the door behind him and moved toward her bed. He stared at the oxygen tube, the line keeping her breathing safely. His fingers twitched. If she stopped breathing now, the authorities would never get her full statement. The baby would be gone, too. The whole problem would disappear before it ruined him. He reached for the tube. His hand hovered over the connection point, and he prepared to pull. The hiss of the oxygen flow filled the quiet space. Then the door swung open. Jacob walked in, holding a cup of water he'd brought for Emily in case she woke up. When he saw Michael with his hand on the oxygen tube, his heart stopped for a fraction of a second. Then fury shot up his spine. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice filling the room with sharp clarity. Michael snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. "I was checking on her," he snapped. "She was having trouble breathing." Jacob didn't hesitate. He crossed the room in 2 strides and shoved Michael away from the equipment. The move sent Michael stumbling. In a matter of seconds, both men collided in a rush of anger and adrenaline. They grappled with each other, slamming into the medical supply tray. A metal cup clattered to the floor. Michael swung first, landing a blow on Jacob's shoulder. Jacob countered with a shove to Michael's arm, pushing him back again. Emily woke with a gasp, terrified by the sudden violence erupting next to her bed. Her heart monitor began to beat faster. The nurses heard the commotion and called security. 2 officers ran down the hall. As they burst in, Michael immediately pointed at Jacob. "He attacked me," he shouted. "He's obsessed with my wife. He's been interfering for days." His performance was quick, almost a reflex, but the officers didn't respond. One pointed toward the black dome camera fixed to the corner of the ceiling. The small red light was blinking steadily. It had recorded everything. An officer requested the security footage, and within minutes, the truth played out on a monitor in the hallway. The footage showed Michael reaching for the oxygen tube with clear intent. It showed Jacob walking in and reacting in defense. Michael's face went colorless as the officers returned, handcuffed him, and led him out of the room while he shouted protests. "You don't understand. I was trying to help her. I was checking her breathing." His voice echoed down the hall. He was taken into custody. The hospital fell quiet again. Emily cried softly as the nurses adjusted her monitors. Jacob stood by her side, calming her with steady words. "You're safe," he repeated. "He can't hurt you right now." She nodded, wiping her tears with the back of a trembling hand. 12 hours later, Michael was released on bail. Jessica appeared outside the police station, surrounded by reporters. She wept with her hands over her face, insisting Michael was innocent, that he had been misunderstood, that he loved his wife. Cameras flashed as she clung to him dramatically. The scene spread across social media within minutes. Back at the hospital, the staff decided to move Emily to a secure on an upper floor. Visitors would be screened. The doors would remain locked. Jacob watched nervously as she was transferred. He requested a few days off from work so he could stay close. His supervisor understood and approved the time without hesitation. The next day, Emily put a hand to her stomach and gasped softly. For the first time since the fire, she felt the faint flutter of movement. The feeling brought tears to her eyes. "The baby is moving again," she whispered. Relief washed over her, even as fear remained close. Meanwhile, Michael's anger festered. His plan had unraveled. Emily was still alive. The police were questioning him. His business partners were calling. Jessica's dramatic crying only made things worse. He couldn't let Emily win. He needed to intimidate her. So late that night, he drove to Jacob's house, hoping to terrorize the man who had interfered one too many times. The house stood quietly under the dim porch light. Michael moved toward the back door, trying to force the lock. Inside, Sarah woke to the faint scraping sound. She sat up, frightened. She walked to Jacob's room and shook his arm. He was up instantly, grabbing a flashlight before heading downstairs. He caught Michael in the act. Michael spun around, his eyes wild, but Jacob stood his ground. A tense standoff ensued until neighbors noticed the shouting and called the police. Michael fled before the officers arrived, disappearing into the darkness. The investigation deepened the next morning when police found evidence that Michael had purchased gasoline and a lighter from a nearby gas station on the same day as the fire. Detectives now suspected arson. Emily received a threatening text from Jessica saying they would get everything back. The words sent a chill through her. The fear for her baby returned in full force. She couldn't remain exposed. Jacob came to her bedside and took her hand gently. "Come stay with me and Sarah," he said. "At least until things settle down. It's safer." Emily hesitated, torn between fear and pride. After several long moments, she nodded. She needed protection, and Jacob offered it without question. Jacob and Sarah welcomed her into their small wooden home near the foothills. Sarah brought her blankets and drew pictures to cheer her up. Jacob cooked simple meals and made sure she had everything she needed. Emily felt a warmth she hadn't felt in months. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt peace slowly returning. The storm began sooner than anyone expected. Heavy snow rolled down the mountains with a force that felt almost unnatural. By dusk, the wind had become a screeching current that hammered against the windows and pushed drifts of snow across the deserted road leading to Jacob's cabin. Weather alerts warned that temperatures could drop to dangerous levels within hours. Jacob stood at the living room window and watched the snow swirl like white smoke through the dark air. He could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Something was coming, and it wasn't just the storm. His phone buzzed. It was a call from the police dispatcher. Michael had escaped his home shortly after being confronted with the gasoline evidence. Officers believed he was armed, or at least carrying something dangerous. The stress, fear, and rage made him unpredictable. He had lost control of the narrative. The investigation was closing in. Jacob felt a chill run down his spine as the dispatcher continued. Jessica had been missing for 6 hours. She hadn't returned calls, and her car couldn't be located. The police suspected she was either helping Michael hide or moving him through the county undetected. The possibility that both of them were working together again made Jacob's hands clench into fists. He hung up the phone and immediately dragged a wooden bookshelf in front of the main door. It wasn't much, but it created a barrier. The storm rattled the windows, making the glass vibrate with each gust. Emily sat on the sofa with a blanket wrapped around her. She rubbed her stomach slowly, trying to calm herself. For the last hour, she'd been feeling mild cramps, likely brought on by the stress. She tried to breathe through them, but each new jolt of fear tensed her body again. Sarah sat close to her, her eyes wide. She clung to Emily as if afraid the storm would take her away. The wind roared outside, a long, keening sound that scraped against the wooden walls. Jacob checked every lock twice, then checked again. The cabin was sturdy, but nothing felt strong enough when he imagined Michael out there in the freezing darkness. A few minutes later, a sudden sound cut through the storm. Slow, uneven footsteps crunched through the deep snow just outside the door. Jacob reached for his flashlight and the flare gun he kept in a drawer for emergencies. His heart pounded. Snowstorms often created echoes, but these steps were too close and too deliberate to be a trick of the wind. Emily looked up with sudden fear. Sarah clung tighter to her side. Jacob moved toward the door with cautious movements. He pressed his shoulder against the wood and listened. The footsteps stopped. Silence settled. Then came the crunch of snow shifting under a weight. He switched on the flashlight and opened the door just enough to slip outside. The wind hit his face so hard it stung like needles. The snow whipped around him. He aimed the beam of light across the porch. No one was there. But in the fresh snow were deep, fresh footprints. They led toward the tree line before vanishing into the storm. He backed into the house and shut the door firmly. "Someone's out there," he said. Emily covered her stomach with both hands, feeling the baby move in a startled reaction. Sarah whimpered softly. The wind continued to slam against the windows, shaking them hard enough to make the glass tremble. The electricity flickered overhead. The lights died, then came back on again. The brief darkness felt like a warning. Emily gasped as another small wave of pain shot through her abdomen. Jacob rushed to her side, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He could feel her shaking. The storm outside intensified. The snow hit the cabin with a dull, heavy rhythm. Another thud suddenly echoed from the back of the house. Sarah screamed. Jacob grabbed the flashlight and ran to the kitchen. The back door was shaking violently, as if someone was forcing it from the outside. The wooden frame groaned under the pressure. Jacob threw the deadbolt and braced the door with his body. The shaking continued for several seconds. Then it stopped as sharply as it had begun. His phone buzzed again. A text message from an unknown number lit up the screen. "Bring her outside." Jacob felt the words like a lurch in his stomach. The message could only have come from one person. He showed the screen to Emily. Her face went pale. She struggled to steady her breathing. Moments later, the police sent another update. Michael's phone signal had been pinged by a nearby cell tower. He was less than half a mile from the cabin. The thought of him lurking somewhere in the storm made Jacob's blood run cold. Emily tried to stand but felt weak. The stress and the cold air had overwhelmed her. Her vision clouded, and she slumped back onto the sofa. Jacob rushed to catch her before she fell. He checked her pulse. It was fast but steady. Her breathing was shallow. He gently lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bedroom. Sarah followed closely, crying softly. He laid Emily on the bed and covered her with blankets. He brushed the loose hair from her face and put his ear near her lips to make sure she was breathing. Another contraction of pain made her flinch, and he soothed her with soft words. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin like a living thing. The snow piled higher against the walls. Jacob realized the house wouldn't hold if Michael forced his way in. They couldn't stay. Emily was too fragile, and Sarah was too scared. There was only one option left. He went to the closet and pulled out heavy coats, gloves, and scarves. He dressed them over Sarah and wrapped Emily carefully, trying not to disturb her breathing. She cracked her eyes open and saw him preparing them. "We're leaving," she whispered. "Yes," he said. "We can't stay here, not with him outside." He lifted her again in his steady arms. Sarah clung to his sleeve, staying close to his leg. Jacob looked down at her and spoke softly through the darkness. "Stay close. Don't let go." He pushed the door open into the raging blizzard, holding Emily tightly against his chest as Sarah clung to his side. The storm swallowed them instantly, but Jacob kept moving forward. He would get them away from danger, no matter what waited in the storm-filled night. The blizzard swallowed the world in white as Jacob forced his way through the deepening snow. He carried Emily on his back, her arms loose around his shoulders, her breathing soft but strained. Every few steps, her forehead would brush against his neck as if she were drifting in and out of consciousness. Sarah walked, pressed tight against his side, gripping his jacket with trembling fingers. The storm had erased the road completely, leaving only the narrow forest trail Jacob knew from hikes with his daughter. It was the only route that kept them hidden from the open fields where Michael could easily spot them. The cold cut at Jacob's face like shards of glass. Snowflakes clung to his eyelashes, and every breath burned his lungs. Behind him, Emily trembled. He could feel her weakness through every shift of her weight. "Hang on," he murmured to her. "We're almost far enough from the cabin." She didn't reply, but he felt her hand tighten slightly against his shirt. The wind screamed through the trees, bending the branches until they groaned loudly. Sarah stumbled but kept walking, refusing to let go of Jacob for even an instant. "Daddy, I'm scared," she whispered. He put his free hand on her shoulder and guided her closer to him. "Stay with me. Don't look back," he said calmly. They reached a narrow clearing where tall pines sheltered them from the worst of the wind. The snow was piled almost to Sarah's knees. Jacob paused for a moment, shifting Emily's weight higher on his back. Her cheek rested against him, cold and damp. He felt the faint tremor of pain run through her body. Then a distant light flickered through the woods. A flashlight beam was moving in slow arcs between the trees. Jacob's heart seized. It was sweeping with a searching purpose. Someone was out there, someone close. The beam grew brighter. A dark figure stepped into the clearing from the opposite side of the woods. Michael. His coat snapped in the wind, his flashlight cutting through the snowfall like a blade. His face twisted when he finally saw them. "Emily," he shouted, "you belong to me. Come here." Jacob instinctively moved in front of Emily and Sarah. His posture straightened, and his voice hardened. "Stop right there. You're not taking her." He could feel Sarah grabbing him tighter from behind. Emily stirred weakly on his back, lifting her head with effort. Michael took several stumbling steps forward. "She's my wife!" he roared. "She isn't going anywhere with you. She owes me everything. She's mine." His voice tore through the wind like a violent rip in the storm. The snow swirled around him as if drawn in by his fury. Jacob remained calm, though adrenaline pounded through his veins. "You almost killed her. You almost killed your own child. Leave now before the police find you. They're already looking." Michael's eyes widened with rage. He lunged toward them through the heavy snow. Jacob turned quickly, lowering Emily and Sarah behind him. Michael slammed into Jacob with enough force to knock them both into the snowbank. Cold powder exploded around them. Michael clawed and punched with wild desperation. Jacob blocked the blows with his arms and fought back with controlled strength, driven by the fear for the two people behind him. They rolled through the snow, their breaths mingling with the roar of the wind. Michael grabbed Jacob's jacket and tried to pin him, but Jacob used his momentum to push him sideways. They slid across the icy surface, leaving a trail scarred by their struggle. Emily pushed herself to her knees despite the sharp pain twisting in her abdomen. "Michael, stop!" she pleaded, her voice breaking. A sudden spasm forced her to clutch her stomach. The pain was sharper this time, terrifyingly intense. She gasped and lost her balance, falling to her hands as the world spun. Sarah ran to her side, crying. "Emily, please be okay," she whimpered. She wrapped her arms around Emily, trying to shield her from the wind. Emily tried to smile at her, but winced in pain again as another wave of it hit her. Michael noticed Emily collapsing. Something broke inside him. He lunged toward her with a furious cry. Jacob reacted instantly, pushing himself to his feet and charging at Michael, tackling him before he reached Emily. Both men went down hard in the snow. Jacob knocked Michael's arm away, forcing him to lose his grip on the ground. Michael thrashed, kicking wildly, but his foot slipped on the icy surface. His weight shifted, his balance broke. The snow beneath him gave way, revealing a hidden depression in the terrain. Michael fell backward into a deep hollow between two fallen logs. Snow poured over him as he slid down, screaming with rage and confusion. He clawed at the edges, trying to get out, but the snow was too loose, and his limbs were too exhausted from the cold. Jacob backed away, breathing hard. He moved quickly to Emily and gently lifted her from the ground. Sarah clung to his leg, still crying. "We need to move," Jacob whispered to Emily. She nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks from the pain and the cold. A distant glow spread between the trees. Headlights, police searchlights, voices called out names through the storm. Officers pushed through the snow, their flashlights illuminating Michael's figure as he desperately tried to climb out of the hollow. He screamed and cursed, but his strength was gone in the cold. The officers reached him first, pulling him out, pinning him, and cuffing his hands behind his back. Michael struggled weakly, still shouting Emily's name, until the wind swallowed his voice. Jacob held Emily close as she finally broke into sobs. Her forehead rested on his shoulder while Sarah wrapped her arms around them both. The police lights painted the snowy woods with pulses of blue and red. Officers rushed toward them, calling for medical assistance. Emily cried harder in Jacob's arms, finally letting the fear and exhaustion leave her body. She felt Sarah's small hands holding her tightly. She felt Jacob's warmth surrounding her in the middle of the frozen woods. She felt, for the first time in weeks, that she might survive this nightmare. The storm continued to rage, but the woods no longer felt hopeless. She was safe. Jacob had stood his ground, and the flashing police lights washed over the snow with a promise that the danger was finally ending. The ambulance raced over the snowy roads leading away from the woods, heading toward the small regional hospital on the edge of the mountains. Emily lay on the gurney, her hands wrapped protectively around her stomach. She could feel the baby's faint flutter of movement, a reminder that she needed to stay strong. Jacob held her hand the entire way, refusing to leave her side. Sarah sat next to him, her face still pale with fear, yet her eyes never left Emily, as if watching over her offered some kind of protection. When they arrived at the hospital, nurses guided them to a quiet examination room. The atmosphere inside was warm compared to the frozen world they had escaped. Doctors came in quickly with calm urgency. They checked Emily's oxygen levels, blood pressure, and heart rate. After a few minutes, they placed a fetal monitor on her stomach. The room went silent as they all listened to the fast, rhythmic heartbeat echo through the speakers. Emily let out a shaky breath. The doctor smiled gently and confirmed the baby was safe for now. Though Emily needed complete rest, her body had endured too much stress and cold. She needed warmth, care, and time. While Emily rested with Sarah sitting near her bed, police escorted Michael to the county detention center. His hands were cuffed, his face red from the cold and humiliation. The officers didn't listen to his protests or excuses. They had seen enough. They had witnessed him screaming in the snowy woods with uncontrollable fury. They had watched him refuse treatment and resist arrest. He was no longer a husband defending himself from lies. He was a suspect in an attempted murder case. The entire county now knew his name for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, officers found Jessica in her car near the state line. She had been hiding behind the wheel with bags packed in the back seat. She claimed she had been planning to visit family, but the timing made her story crumble immediately. She was removed from the car and placed in a patrol vehicle. She cried and pleaded for leniency, insisting she had no idea what Michael had been planning. The officers didn't believe her, not after everything that had come to light. By midday, the charges against Michael and Jessica were formally announced: attempted murder, conspiracy, endangerment of a pregnant woman, arson. The weight of the legal accusations sent shockwaves through the town. News channels picked up the story within hours. When reporters learned that a pregnant woman had survived a burning car, an attack in the hospital, and a chase through a blizzard, they rushed to find her. Emily was resting when the first wave of cameras arrived in the hospital lobby. Jacob stepped into the hallway and spoke with the staff, insisting she not be overwhelmed. But Emily heard the commotion. She knew what it meant. People wanted to hear her story. People wanted the truth. She had been silent for too long, terrified to speak up. But now Michael was in custody. Jessica was detained. Jacob and Sarah were safe. And most importantly, her baby was alive. Emily took a deep breath and told the nurse she was ready to talk. When she entered the small press area the hospital had arranged, the camera lights turned to her. Reporters leaned forward with their microphones. Emily sat in a chair with Jacob by her side. Sarah stood behind them, her hands resting on Jacob's shoulder. Emily began slowly. She told them about the fire. She described the moment Michael locked the SUV doors and doused the ground with gasoline. She described his cold expression as he walked away. She told them about the 2 a.m. hospital attack when he tried to remove her oxygen tube. She told them about the escape through the snow, the confrontation in the woods, and Michael's violence when he found them. Her voice trembled, but she kept going. The truth came out like a long-held breath finally being released. The reporters listened, wide-eyed. The camera operators zoomed in. Passing nurses stood still to hear her words. The truth was no longer hidden. Emily had finally spoken. Within minutes, social media exploded with reactions. A hashtag appeared almost instantly: #Justice for Emily. Thousands of people began sharing it. Survivors of domestic violence posted messages of solidarity. Women who had suffered in silence felt their voices echo in Emily's. Men who had seen the brutality of controlling partners spoke out about the danger women face behind closed doors. The story crossed state lines within hours. News stations replayed the footage of Jacob carrying Emily from the burning vehicle. Commentators called him a hero. Some reported on his past as a firefighter. Others highlighted the tenderness of the moment he shielded her in the woods with only his body. The story went from a local crime to a national headline. Support organizations reached out to the hospital, offering assistance, legal resources, counseling, and protection. They wanted Emily to know she was not alone. They wanted her baby to be safe. They wanted justice to move forward without hesitation. Elsewhere in town, Jessica sat in an interrogation room. When confronted with the evidence against her, she broke down completely. Through her tears, she blamed Michael. She claimed he had manipulated her. She insisted she had no idea the situation would turn violent. She begged for clemency, trying to reduce her role in the crime. Cameras outside the police station captured footage of her being led away in handcuffs, her sobbing face filling television screens across the country. Michael's lawyer made a public statement shortly after. He told reporters that Michael had experienced a momentary loss of control. He said Michael needed a mental evaluation and compassion. The public reacted with outrage. People demanded accountability, not excuses. Back at the hospital, Emily sat with Jacob for a live interview. When asked how she had survived it all, she lifted her hand and placed it over Jacob's. Her voice softened as she said, "He saved me and my baby. He protected us when no one else did. He gave us a chance to live." Sarah moved closer, wrapping her small arms around Emily's shoulders. The cameras captured the moment. It spread immediately across social media. Millions saw it. Millions felt something move in their hearts. Emily's truth had finally been heard, and now the country was demanding justice. The courthouse was already surrounded by news vans when the sun came up. Reporters wore heavy coats as cameras focused on the front doors, ready to capture every second of what many were calling the most significant criminal trial the county had seen in years. Inside, security officers screened everyone who approached the courtroom. The gravity of the case hung in the air like a weight. Michael was brought in through a secure corridor. His wrists were cuffed, and his face showed the pale, angry exhaustion of a man who had lost control of everything. He glanced at the crowd but found no sympathy in the eyes around him. Moments later, Jessica arrived in a security vehicle. Her hands were cuffed tightly, and she stepped out, trembling as reporters shouted her name. Officers guided her inside the building. She kept her head down, aware that every camera was capturing her fall from the glamorous life she once proudly displayed. Inside the courtroom, the public seats filled quickly. Every row was packed with journalists, local residents, legal observers, and people who had followed Emily's story from the beginning. Whispered conversations echoed through the room until the bailiff called for silence. Jacob and Emily entered the courtroom together and took a seat in the front row. Emily wore a calm expression, though her hands trembled slightly as she placed them over her belly. The baby's steady movements reminded her she was fighting for more than just her own justice. Jacob sat beside her, prepared to testify again. His protective presence made her feel safe, even as the tension of the room pressed in on her. The trial began with the prosecutor laying out the foundation of the case. He started with the hospital footage. The large screen came to life as the video showed Michael entering the room, approaching the bed where Emily slept, and reaching for the oxygen tube. The jury leaned forward. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Michael stared at the floor. The prosecutor explained every detail, emphasizing intent and danger. Then he moved to the second piece of footage. The confrontation in the snowy woods appeared on the screen. The jury watched Michael screaming, lunging, and fighting Jacob while Emily collapsed in pain. The silence in the room deepened. Next came Jessica's involvement. She was called to the stand. Her face was streaked with tears as she looked at the jurors. She explained how Michael had manipulated her. She admitted she had helped him on several occasions and claimed she never believed he would actually hurt Emily. She insisted she only acted out of fear and confusion. The prosecutor questioned her carefully. She finally stated that Michael had forced her to help him escape, and she hoped admitting the truth would reduce her sentence. Her testimony filled the courtroom with a heavy sense of betrayal. Michael's lawyer tried to refute the allegations. He argued that Michael had suffered a momentary psychological breakdown. He painted Michael as a man overwhelmed by pressure, not a criminal. But the evidence stood firm. Every word of testimony, every recorded attack, every medical report contradicted the defense. The courtroom sensed it. Even the jurors seemed unconvinced by the argument of temporary panic. When Emily was called to the stand, the entire courtroom seemed to stop breathing. She rose slowly and walked to the witness chair. She placed her hand on her belly as she raised the other to be sworn in. The jury watched her intently. Her voice trembled at first, but it grew steady. She described the night Michael locked her inside the burning car. She described the panic, the flames, the fear she felt for her unborn child. She described the hospital attack and the moment she realized Michael wanted her gone completely. The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned forward. Emily's words flowed with a raw honesty that pierced every listening heart. The prosecutor asked her to describe the confrontation in the woods. She recounted how Jacob carried her through the snow, how Sarah tried to comfort her, how Michael appeared from the darkness demanding control. When she described Michael pushing her and the pain tearing through her body, several jurors reacted visibly. Her voice broke when she spoke of thinking she might lose her child. She wiped her tears and continued until she had told everything she had endured. Jacob took the stand next. His steady voice contrasted with the emotion in Emily's. He spoke about the fire, the rescue, the hospital confrontation, and finally the battle in the woods. His testimony conveyed the clarity of a man who had lived through each event with a full awareness of the danger. He answered every question with care and precision. When asked why he took the risk, he looked toward Emily and said simply that no decent person could have left her behind. Expert witnesses followed. A fire investigator testified that the SUV had been deliberately set ablaze. A medical specialist described the dangers Emily and her unborn child had faced. The evidence grew heavier with each testimony. Every detail pointed to a pattern of intentional harm. At one point, Michael erupted during cross-examination. He screamed that everyone was lying, that Emily had ruined his life, that Jacob had manipulated her. His voice was sharp with rage. Officers moved forward immediately as the judge ordered him to sit and remain silent. The jury watched the outburst carefully. It revealed more truth than any testimony could. Outside the courthouse, a large crowd chanted, "Justice for Emily." Reporters delivered updates every hour. The nation waited for the outcome. Inside the courtroom, Emily reached for Jacob's hand. She was shaking. The judge prepared to send the jury to deliberate. Michael glared at her with hatred as officers prepared to escort him out. Jessica cried softly at her table, realizing the weight of her choices and the life she had destroyed. The courtroom felt suspended in time. Emily held onto Jacob's hand and whispered a silent prayer. Everything depended on what happened next. The jury returned after 4 intense hours of deliberation, their faces solemn as they filed into the silent courtroom. Every seat was filled, and every breath seemed to be held at once. Emily tightened her hands around her stomach as Jacob kept his arms steady behind her, preparing for whatever decision awaited them. Michael stood between 2 officers as the verdict was read. The courtroom felt colder as the judge announced the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Michael's expression twisted with disbelief, but no one looked away. Justice, long overdue, had finally come for Emily and the child she protected. Jessica entered moments later, escorted by guards, her wrists secured as she faced the courtroom with trembling shoulders. The judge delivered her sentence as well, declaring 25 years in state prison for her role as an accomplice and for attempting to flee prosecution. The weight of her actions finally crashed down on her. The moment the final words were spoken, Emily broke into tears. Her body shook with the release of months of terror. Jacob reached for her instantly, wrapping his arms around her as Sarah leaned over from the bench to hug them both, creating a circle of warmth in the middle of the courtroom's tension. Reporters rushed outside to deliver breaking headlines, and within minutes, major news outlets spread the victory of justice nationwide. The public felt a collective sense of triumph as they watched the coverage. Many had followed every step of Emily's struggle, and now they celebrated the decision with overwhelming support and renewed compassion. After the medical staff confirmed she was well enough to leave, Emily was discharged with specific instructions to rest and avoid stress. Jacob drove her and Sarah back toward the cabin, taking extra care on the mountain roads. The snow had softened, and sunlight filtered through the trees like an invitation toward a quieter life. Back at the cabin, Emily felt the baby kick harder than it had in days. The feeling brought a soft smile to her face. She placed Jacob's hand gently on her stomach so he could feel it, too. Sarah watched with bright wonder, her relief blossoming into joy as she felt the safety of the moment. Over the next few days, the community sent a flood of gifts to the cabin. Boxes arrived filled with blankets, baby clothes, letters of encouragement, and small, handmade items. Emily read each message slowly, moved by the kindness of strangers who had followed her story. The generosity wrapped the home in comfort. Jacob spent the afternoon repairing the damaged door Michael had tried to force during the storm. He measured the frame carefully and replaced the broken panels, wanting the cabin to feel secure again. Emily watched him from the window, grateful for the patience and quiet dedication he put into every task he completed. Inside, Sarah painted a colorful picture using her small set of watercolor brushes. When she finished, she proudly taped it to the living room wall. The drawing showed 3 figures holding hands under a bright sun. She called it her new family picture, and the simplicity of it brought warm tears to Emily's eyes. That evening, Emily insisted on helping to prepare a small dinner. She moved slowly but deliberately as she chopped vegetables and stirred the soup. While Jacob handled the heavier tasks, the scent of warm herbs filled the cabin. Sarah set the table with careful hands, proud to contribute. Together, they created a peaceful atmosphere. As the sun began to set, a golden light poured through the windows. The glow softened every surface it touched, giving the room a gentle radiance. Emily paused by the counter and took a deep breath, letting herself soak in the moment. Peace, something she was afraid she would never feel again, finally settled warmly around her. Jacob came over and placed his hand gently on Emily's stomach. He waited, and within seconds, he felt the baby push back with a small, firm kick. His eyes softened with wonder. He looked at Emily and saw renewed strength in her expression. She smiled back at him with a gratitude that words could never fully capture. Sarah climbed onto a small wooden chair and moved closer to Emily's belly. She pressed her ear gently against the fabric of Emily's sweater and listened with pure fascination. When she heard the rhythmic movement, she giggled softly and clapped her hands. The sound filled the room with a sweetness that smoothed over every worry. Jacob stood behind them, feeling the quiet weight of everything they had survived. He placed one hand on Sarah's shoulder and the other on Emily's back, the small family they had become. It felt real in that moment. The storm had taken so much from them, yet it had brought them together in a way none of them expected. He looked out the window at the fading colors of the sky. The forest stretched silently beyond the cabin, its snow-covered branches glowing. Emily stood beside him, leaning gently on his shoulder. She whispered her thanks for his courage and patience. He assured her she deserved peace, safety, and every bright moment that was still to come. Jacob turned to her and pulled her into a warm embrace. Sarah joined the hug with a bright smile. The 3 of them stood together in the center of the room, sharing in warmth and hope. Emily felt the baby move again, reminding her that life continued to grow inside her. Despite every hardship they had faced together, the cabin felt like a sanctuary. Emily breathed calmly for the first time in a long time. Jacob placed a blanket around her shoulders and guided her to the sofa. Sarah climbed up beside them, resting her head on Emily's arm. The quiet stillness wrapped around the 3 of them like a promise of something better. Outside, twilight settled over the snow as the cabin grew quiet. Emily whispered that she finally felt free. Jacob held her hand as Sarah leaned against her, their small family embracing the quiet night that promised a future.